Hey everyone. I know you guys are all about getting to the bottom of how society really works,
Yeah,
like peeling back the layers and seeing what's going on underneath.
absolutely.
Well, today's deep dive is going to hit home for a lot of you, especially if you're trying to figure out uh, the whole relationship game these days.
Yeah.
We're cracking open Truth Wars, Combating Fake News in the Age of AI by Conrad Riker.
Oh, interesting.
And this book, it's not just about like spotting fake news headlines. It's about how information gets twisted and used, even weaponized sometimes.
Mm,
And we don't even realize it's happening half the time.
right.
So like Riker uses this crazy example, the GameStop stock thing, remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
Where it seemed like just a bunch of guys on Reddit taking on Wall Street, but Riker says it's way deeper than that.
It is. What's fascinating is how he connects it to these powerful interests, manipulating things behind the scenes. Like they can literally shape the narrative and even the financial markets.
So it's not just about being able to spot a fake news article. It's about understanding like the bigger game that's being played.
Exactly. And that's crucial for anyone trying to understand power dynamics.
And that's everywhere.
Everywhere, exactly. In finance and politics, even in our personal relationships.
Whoa, okay, so we're talking some serious stuff here.
Yeah.
Riker doesn't hold back. He even talks about Pizzagate,
Oh, wow.
that whole crazy conspiracy theory that went viral a few years ago.
Right, right.
What's his take on that?
Well, he uses it to show how easily we can get tricked by our own biases, even when we think we're being super critical.
Hmm.
Pizzagate played on people's anxieties and beliefs, right? Making even the most outlandish claims seem believable.
Yeah.
It shows how certain narratives, once they take hold, they're almost impossible to get rid of.
So how does all of this connect back to relationships? Specifically for guys who are like, hey, I feel like I'm getting a raw deal here.
That's the question.
What can they learn from Truth Wars?
The key takeaway is this Riker says we all operate under these covert contracts, these unspoken assumptions about how the world works.
Hmm.
These contracts shape our expectations and our interactions without us even realizing it.
Oh, okay.
And for men who feel like they're constantly on the losing end, Riker suggests they need to examine the covert contracts they've bought into.
Okay, so instead of just complaining about the system or how women act, guys need to take a hard look at their own assumptions.
Exactly, because those assumptions, those covert contracts, might be based on outdated information or even deliberate misinformation.
And Riker goes deep into the history of this, right? Like how these societal narratives have been shaped and reshaped over time.
He does. He really digs into the historical roots.
So a guy who's struggling in his marriage can learn something from how a stock market gets manipulated.
That's the genius of Riker's approach. He helps you see the underlying patterns, the mechanics of how power and influence work.
It's like a universal code.
Exactly. It applies whether it's Wall Street or your living room.
Mind blow. Okay, so is Truth Wars like a toolkit for dissecting these covert contracts?
You could say that.
Give us an example.
Well, he talks about how the traditional view of romantic love, the whole knight in shining armor rescues the damsel in distress thing,
Yeah.
that might actually be a covert contract that disadvantages men.
How so?
It sets up these unrealistic expectations,
Right.
and it can blind them to the power dynamics that are actually happening in the relationship.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this applies to the red pill philosophy.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the hidden scripts we're all following,
Precisely.
even when those scripts aren't doing us any favors.
Exactly. And once you see those scripts, you can start to rewrite them.
Empowering stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so Riker also gets into the psychology of deception, right? How does that play into all of this?
This is where it gets really fascinating. Riker dives into how fake news exploits our cognitive biases.
Okay.
For example, confirmation bias. We tend to look for information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are on shaky ground.
Mm-hmm.
He uses the climate change debate as an example,
Okay.
how both sides cherry-pick data to support their pre-existing views.
So even when we think we're being objective, our brains are tricking us.
In a way, yes.
Wow. Okay, so how does this apply to relationships?
Imagine a guy who's convinced all women are gold diggers. Every time he meets a woman who fits that stereotype, it reinforces his belief, even though it might be a tiny percentage of women overall.
Right.
And he might ignore all the women who don't fit that stereotype because it doesn't fit his narrative.
That's kind of scary. So even when we're trying to be red pill
Yeah.
and see things clearly, our own biases can still mess us up.
It's a constant battle.
So what's the solution?
Riker says the first step is awareness. We need to understand our own biases, the filters we're using to process information.
Oh, yeah.
Then we can start to challenge those biases, to actively seek out information that contradicts our beliefs.
So it's about being open-minded even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to question everything, even the beliefs we hold most dear.
That's a tough one. No wonder Riker calls his book Truth Wars. It's like we're constantly battling against our own biases and the narratives that are being pushed on us.
And against the very technology that's supposed to be connecting us.
Right.
Riker gets into how the internet and social media, while amazing tools, are also breeding grounds for misinformation.
It's like a double-edged sword.
It's the speed and reach, how a lie can go viral in minutes, reaching millions before the truth has a chance to catch up.
It's like trying to fight a wildfire with a garden hose.
Yeah.
But wait, didn't Riker say that fake news isn't even a new thing?
He did. He points out that misinformation has always been around. Think of propaganda during wars, or even just gossip and rumors spreading in small towns.
Yeah.
The internet just amplifies it.
Oh, it's not a new problem, but it's definitely a bigger problem now.
Absolutely.
And it's not just affecting politics and current events. Riker argues that it's impacting our personal lives, even our health decisions.
He talks about the anti-vaccine movement, how it's fueled by misinformation and fear-mongering, and then there are all the fad diets and miracle cures being peddled online, preying on people's insecurities and desires.
It's scary stuff. It seems like we're constantly being bombarded with messages trying to manipulate us, whether it's to buy something, vote a certain way, or even just to feel bad about ourselves.
And that's why Riker's work is so important. He gives us the tools to deconstruct those messages, to see through the smoke and mirrors and get to the truth.
It's like he's giving us a decoder ring for the information age.
I like that analogy.
Now, before we go any further, I want to address the guys listening who are dealing with the fallout of a divorce or custody battle. How does Truth Wars apply to them?
Riker's analysis of institutions is particularly relevant here. He argues that many of our institutions, from the legal system to the education system, have been shaped by certain narratives and ideologies.
Okay.
Understanding this historical context can help men navigate these systems more effectively, recognizing the biases they might encounter.
So it's not just about understanding what's happening in the courtroom, but also about understanding the larger forces that have shaped the legal system itself.
Precisely. Riker argues that we need to be aware of the covert contracts that underpin these institutions. For example, the assumption that women are always the primary caregivers, which can disadvantage men in custody battles.
It's about seeing the hidden scripts that are being played out even in the most serious areas of our lives.
Exactly. And once you see those scripts, you can start to challenge them.
This is heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly empowering. It's like Riker is giving us the tools to take back control of our lives, to make informed decisions, and to fight for what we believe in.
And to navigate a world where the line between truth and fiction is becoming increasingly blurred.
Okay, so we've established that fake news is a big problem and that it's impacting our lives in ways we might not even realize. But what can we do about it? What solutions does Riker propose?
Well, he advocates for a multifaceted approach. He talks about the importance of education, critical thinking, fact-checking.
Hold on, let's unpack this. What does he mean by education?
He's not just talking about traditional schooling. He's talking about media literacy, teaching people how to critically evaluate information, to identify bias, to distinguish between credible sources and those pushing an agenda.
So it's like learning a new language, the language of information in the digital age.
Exactly. We need to be fluent in that language if we want to navigate this complex world.
Okay, what about critical thinking? How do we get better at that?
Riker argues that it's a skill that can be learned and practiced. It involves things like questioning assumptions, identifying logical fallacies, and considering different perspectives.
So it's about being curious about not just accepting things at face value. It's about digging deeper and asking why.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to change your mind when presented with new evidence.
Okay, what about fact-checking? How does that fit into all of this?
Riker emphasizes the role of independent fact-checking organizations. These are groups dedicated to verifying the accuracy of information, to debunking false claims, and to holding those who spread misinformation accountable.
So it's like having a team of truth detectives on our side.
Exactly. And there are some fantastic resources available online like Snopes and PolitiFact.
Okay, so we've got education, critical thinking, and fact-checking. What else does Riker suggest?
Well, he also talks about the role of technology in combating fake news. He argues that we can use AI to develop tools that can help us detect and flag misinformation.
So it's like a digital arms race. The fake news creators are using technology to spread misinformation, and we can use technology to fight back.
Exactly. And Riker discusses some promising developments in this area, such as AI algorithms that can analyze text and images to identify patterns that are characteristic of fake news.
That's encouraging. It seems like we're not completely powerless in this fight, but Riker also acknowledges that technology is only part of the solution, right?
Absolutely. He emphasizes that technology alone can't solve the problem. We also need to address a human element.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. He's talking about things like social responsibility, right?
Right. Exactly. He argues that we all have a role to play in combating the spread of misinformation. We need to be more mindful of what we share online, to be willing to challenge misinformation when we see it, and to promote a culture of truth and accountability.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves from being deceived, but also about protecting others.
Precisely. We need to be good digital citizens, to look out for each other and to work together to create a more trustworthy and reliable information environment.
It's like we're all in this together. We're all part of the same team, fighting for the same goal, the truth.
Exactly. And Riker argues that it's a fight worth fighting because ultimately the truth matters.
It does. It matters to our individual lives, to our relationships, to our communities, and to our society as a whole.
And by working together, by being informed and engaged, we can protect the truth and create a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the big picture, about the societal implications of fake news, but I want to bring it back to the personal level for a moment.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, fake news impacts us all on a personal level.
Exactly. And for the guys listening who are struggling in their relationships, who are feeling lost and confused, Riker's book offers some valuable insights.
He encourages us to question the narratives we've been told about love, marriage, and relationships. He challenges us to examine the covert contracts we've bought into to see if they're truly serving our best interests.
It's about taking a step back and looking at our lives with fresh eyes to see if we're living in accordance with our values and our goals.
Exactly. And if we're not, then we need to make changes. We need to rewrite our own personal narratives.
That's powerful stuff. It's about taking back control of our lives and creating the relationships we want now. Before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I want to touch on something that's particularly relevant to the red pill community: the idea of female hypergamy.
Yes, hypergamy. It's a concept that's often misunderstood and misrepresented.
Exactly. And Riker doesn't shy away from this topic. He explores it in depth, drawing on evolutionary psychology and social science to explain its origins and its implications.
He argues that hypergamy is a natural human instinct present in both men and women, but manifested differently due to biological and societal factors.
So it's not about demonizing women or portraying them as manipulative. It's about understanding the underlying dynamics at play.
Precisely. And Riker emphasizes that understanding hypergamy can actually be helpful for men. It can help them to make more informed decisions about their relationships, to set realistic expectations, and to avoid common pitfalls.
So it's not about suppressing or denying this instinct, but about understanding it and working with it.
Exactly. And Riker provides some practical advice for men on how to do that.
This is fascinating stuff.
Mhm.
I'm starting to see how truth wars can be a valuable resource for men who are trying to navigate the complexities of modern relationships. It's about understanding the hidden scripts, the covert contracts, and the evolutionary forces that are shaping our interactions.
And it's about empowering ourselves to rewrite those scripts and to create relationships that are fulfilling and authentic.
Okay, before we dive into the next part of our deep dive, let's take a quick recap.
Sounds good.
We've established that fake news is a pervasive problem, that it's not a new phenomenon, and that it's impacting our lives in ways we might not even realize.
And we've discussed how it's tied to the manipulation of narratives, the exploitation of our cognitive biases, and the rapid spread of information through the internet and social media.
We've also talked about some potential solutions, such as education, critical thinking, fact-checking technology, and social responsibility.
And we've highlighted how understanding these concepts can help men navigate their relationships more effectively, to see through the smoke and mirrors, and to make informed decisions.
Exactly. Now, in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of these solutions in more depth, starting with the role of education and critical thinking. We'll also delve into some specific examples of how fake news has impacted our institutions and our society.
And we'll discuss some practical steps that men can take to protect themselves from misinformation and to create more authentic and fulfilling relationships.
It's going to be good, so stay tuned.
All right, so ready to jump back into truth wars?
Yeah, let's do it. We left off talking about solutions, and I think for a lot of guys out there, education is key.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it comes to relationships. It's like no one ever gives us the playbook right.
You're right. It's like we're thrown into the game without knowing the rules.
Exactly.
And Riker makes this brilliant point. He says traditional education, it focuses on facts and figures,
Right.
but it completely neglects critical thinking and media literacy. Like, those are the skills we need
Yeah.
to actually break down these narratives, separate fact from fiction, not just in the news, but in our personal lives too.
So it's not just about learning more facts. It's about learning how to think about those facts,
That's it.
how to analyze them, question them, see them in
Yeah.
context.
You got it.
Okay, so how do we learn to do that? How do we learn to fish for the truth?
Okay. I like that.
Especially in a world where everyone's got an opinion online.
Right. Well, Riker, one of the first things he emphasizes is recognizing our own biases. We all have them. It's human nature.
Yeah.
But if we're not aware of them, they can really distort how we see the world.
Okay, so let's say a guy is going through a tough divorce and he's convinced the system is rigged against him. Is that a bias?
It could be. It's important to acknowledge the pain and frustration he's feeling,
Right.
but also to ask, is this belief based on my individual experience, or is it being shaped by a larger narrative?
So it's like taking a step back and saying, am I seeing the whole picture or just the part that fits with what I already believe?
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in. Riker actually provides a toolkit for this, strategies for dissecting information, identifying logical fallacies, and spotting manipulation tactics.
Give us an example. What's a common manipulation tactic that guys should watch out for?
Okay, well, Riker talks about appeal to emotion. It's when someone tries to bypass logic and reason by triggering strong feelings like fear, anger, or guilt.
Yeah.
This is used all the time in political campaigns, but it can also show up in personal relationships.
Oh, totally. I've seen that. Like when someone tries to win an argument by making you feel bad instead of actually addressing the issue.
Exactly. And Riker gives specific examples from advertising and propaganda to show how this technique is used to manipulate people's behavior.
It's like learning the Jedi mind tricks, but for the real world.
Yeah.
So once a guy recognizes these tactics, what can he do about it?
Well, Riker argues that knowledge is power. Once you understand how these techniques work, they lose their effectiveness. You can see them for what they are, attempts to manipulate you.
So it's like having a mental shield against BS.
Exactly. And this shield is essential for navigating the online world, especially for guys who are seeking truth and authenticity in their relationships.
Now, Riker also talks about the importance of fact-checking.
He does, and he makes a really important point about who's doing the fact-checking. He warns against relying solely on sources that already align with your worldview.
So if a guy is deep into the red pill philosophy, he shouldn't just rely on red pill websites for his information.
That's what Riker would argue. He encourages seeking out diverse perspectives, even those you might disagree with.
Okay.
It's not about blindly accepting everything, but about exposing yourself to different viewpoints to get a more complete picture.
That's tough, especially when you feel like you've finally found a community that understands you.
Yeah.
But I see your point. It's about staying open-minded even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. And Riker provides practical tips for evaluating sources. Look at their track record, their funding, their potential biases. He even suggests using fact-checking websites like Snopes or PolitiFact,
Right.
but not as the final word, more like a starting point for your own investigation.
So it's like being your own detective, following the trail of evidence wherever it leads.
Precisely, and that's empowering. You're not just passively consuming information, you're actively engaging with it, critically analyzing it, and forming your own conclusions.
Riker also talks about how AI can be both a tool for spreading fake news and a tool for fighting it right.
He does, and this gets into some really fascinating territory. On the one hand, AI can be used to create deepfakes.
Oh.
Those incredibly realistic fake videos that can make anyone appear to say or do anything.
Those are scary. I've seen some that are so convincing it's impossible to tell they're fake.
Exactly, and that's why Riker argues that we need to be aware of the potential for deepfakes to be used to manipulate us, to damage reputations, and to sow discord.
So how do we protect ourselves from deepfakes?
Riker suggests a combination of technical solutions, education, and social responsibility.
Okay, let's break those down. What are some technical solutions?
Well, researchers are developing AI algorithms that can analyze videos for signs of manipulation. They look for inconsistencies in lighting shadows or even subtle facial tics that might betray a deepfake.
So it's like using AI to fight AI.
Exactly. It's a digital arms race. But Riker also acknowledges that technology alone isn't enough. We also need to educate people about deepfakes.
So it's about raising awareness, teaching people how to spot the telltale signs of a fake video.
Exactly. And it's also about being more critical of the information we consume online. Just because we see a video of someone doing something doesn't mean it's real.
It's like the old saying, don't believe everything you see on the internet. But in today's world, that advice is more important than ever.
Absolutely. And Riker also emphasizes the role of social responsibility.
Okay.
We need to be careful about what we share online, and we need to be willing to challenge misinformation when we see it.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves, but also about protecting others from being deceived. Now, I know a lot of guys in the red pill community are skeptical of the mainstream media. They feel like it's biased against them, that it's pushing a feminist agenda. Does Riker address this?
He does, and he acknowledges that the media isn't perfect.
Yeah.
It has its biases, just like any other institution, but he also argues that the media plays a vital role in a democracy. It's responsible for informing the public, holding powerful people accountable, and providing a platform for diverse voices.
So it's not about blindly trusting the media, but also not dismissing it outright. It's about being critical consumers of information, regardless of the source.
Exactly. And Riker provides some helpful tips for evaluating media sources. He suggests looking at their track record, their funding, and their potential biases.
Okay.
He also encourages seeking out diverse perspectives, reading news from multiple outlets, and comparing their coverage of the same event.
So it's about being discerning, about not just accepting the first version of the story you hear, but about doing your own research and forming your own conclusions.
Precisely. And that's empowering. You're not just passively consuming information, you're actively engaging with it, critically analyzing it, and forming your own opinions.
Now, Riker also talks about the role of government in combating fake news. What's his take on that?
He acknowledges the complexity of this issue.
Yeah.
He explores the arguments for and against government regulation, highlighting the potential for censorship and the difficulty of defining fake news in an objective way.
It's a slippery slope, right? On the one hand, we want to protect people from being harmed by misinformation, but on the other hand, we don't want the government to control what we can and can't say.
Exactly. And Riker doesn't offer a simple solution. He encourages readers to think critically about the role of government in the information age and to consider the trade-offs involved in any attempt to regulate speech online.
So it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Precisely. And Riker doesn't shy away from that complexity. He presents the different perspectives, the arguments for and against various solutions, and he encourages readers to form their own conclusions.
Which aligns perfectly with his overall message of empowering individuals to become critical thinkers and informed citizens.
Exactly, and that's what makes Truth Wars such a valuable resource. It's not a book that tells you what to think, it's a book that teaches you how to think.
Now, in the last part of our deep dive, we're going to get even more practical. We'll explore some specific examples of how fake news has impacted our institutions and our society. And we'll discuss some actionable steps that men can take to protect themselves from misinformation and to create more authentic and fulfilling relationships.
It's about taking Riker's insights and applying them to our everyday lives.
So stay tuned. Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into Truth Wars.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. It's been a real eye-opener, hasn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
This book, for guys trying to figure out relationships, it's like a survival guide.
I like that, a survival guide. Because Riker, he really lays out the hidden traps, the things we don't even realize are shaping our expectations.
Those covert contracts, man, they're everywhere.
Exactly. And he gives us the tools to break free, to rewrite the scripts, to create relationships that are actually, real.
Authentic. So, in this last part, let's get even more practical. Riker gives some real-world examples of how fake news messes things up, right?
He does. And one that hits close to home for a lot of guys is the legal system, especially family court.
Divorce, custody battles, all that.
Exactly. Riker argues that a lot of these courts, they're stuck in the past. They're working with these outdated ideas about gender roles.
Like the tender years doctrine.
Yeah, that's a big one. The idea that moms are automatically better for young kids.
But Riker says that's not based on good science. It's just an old stereotype.
Right. He points to research showing that kids need both parents.
Doesn't matter if you're mom or dad.
Exactly. And Riker says this tender years thing, it hurts dads. Less time with their kids keeps those old stereotypes alive.
So this is a classic example of a covert contract working in the system, affecting guys' lives.
It is. And it's a wake-up call for guys to understand the system, see the bias, and fight for their rights as fathers.
Okay, heavy stuff. What about fake news in health and wellness? Riker gets into that too, right?
Oh yeah, a whole chapter on it. He talks about the anti-vaccine movement, all the fad diets, the dangerous medical myths out there.
It's crazy. With the internet, everyone's an expert now.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in all the misinformation.
So it's the antidote.
Riker gives some solid advice. Be skeptical of those miracle cures. Check out who's giving the advice. Talk to a real doctor.
Basic stuff, but important.
Absolutely. He also stresses critical thinking. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
Correlation, causation.
Exactly. And be careful with those personal stories. They can be powerful, but they don't always show the whole truth.
Got it. Thinking clearly is key, especially when it comes to our health. Now, Riker also talks about how fake news messes with how we see masculinity, right?
He does, and this is huge for the Red Pill guys, because there's this feeling that being a man is under attack these days.
Yeah, like all the old ways are bad or something.
Riker says, look at how men are shown in the media, often incompetent, goofy, even dangerous.
The dad in the sitcom who's always messing up.
Exactly. And even though it's supposed to be funny, Riker says it reinforces these negative stereotypes.
Hurts guys' self-esteem, keeps those harmful ideas alive.
Right. So, again, be critical of what you're watching, reading, listening to. Whose agenda is being pushed?
And don't be afraid to call out the BS when you see it.
Exactly. Okay, so we've been talking solutions. What can guys actually do about all this?
Yeah, give us the action plan.
All right, straight from Truth Wars, here's the rundown. Number 1, be skeptical. Question everything.
Don't just believe something because it feels good or fits your current view.
Right. Dig deeper, look for real evidence. Number 2, get your information from different places. Don't get stuck in one echo chamber.
Branch out. Even read stuff you disagree with.
Exactly. See all sides. Number 3, watch what you share online. Don't just click that share button without thinking.
Think before you post, man.
Think about where the info came from. Is it accurate? What could happen if you spread it?
Good point. What else?
This is important. Talk to people who disagree with you. Respectfully. Don't just write them off.
Try to understand where they're coming from. Maybe you'll both learn something.
Exactly. And finally, support truth tellers. Subscribe to good news sources. Donate to fact checkers. Stand up for journalists.
Those guys are on the front lines. So
Yeah.
basically, be informed, be engaged, be responsible.
That's it. And together, we can push back against the BS and create a world where truth actually matters.
Because it does matter. It affects our lives, our relationships, our whole society.
It's the foundation of everything.
All right, before we sign off, one last thought from Conrad Riker himself.
He says, the truth is out there, but it's buried. We got to dig for it, uncover it, and share it with the world.
Love it. So guys, be truth warriors. Get out there armed with knowledge, critical thinking, and that healthy dose of skepticism.
And never give up on the truth. It's a fight worth fighting.
That's it for our deep dive into Truth Wars, Combating Fake News in the Age of AI by Conrad Riker. If you want to go deeper, check it out on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Until next time, stay informed, stay sharp, and stay true to yourselves.